Hi, Rachel. Welcome to This Organized Life. I'm so glad to have you joining us.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on. I so appreciate it.
I am really excited to have you on to talk about your new book. I already gave our listeners who weren't familiar with you a top line overview, but maybe you could just give them a brief background about who you are, your background, and then we can dive into the goods of your new book.
Yes, well, for the last decade now, have been traveling across America, talking, speaking, writing, doing videos and podcasts, all on the subject of personal finance. And it's something I'm really passionate about. My story goes back even from the year I was born. My parents filed for bankruptcy that year. And so really having this front row seat of watching my parents figure out how money really works really impacted me on a deep level. And so growing up kind of with that vernacular and the subject of money being a very comfortable subject and learning, the common sense ways of going about it. When I graduated from college is when I realized, wow, there is not a lot of common sense right now in the way people handle their money. So I just became very passionate about teaching people how to get out of debt, how to budget, how to invest, how to give, how to build wealth, how to pay off their house. I mean, all these things that have to do with personal finance. And so over the last decade doing that, this book has taken me in a totally kind of not complete different direction, but a little bit of really digging into not just the how-to, but the why, starting to ask these questions, not just how to handle my money, but why do I handle it the way I do?
I love it. And a lot of our listeners know who've been with me for a while. I think there's so many parallels between clutter and finances. On the first hand, I think people think that they're supposed to be born knowing how to organize, just like they're supposed to be born knowing how to handle money. And so many people, I'm a huge fan of your dad and the show and everything Ramsey. And so anybody that's listened, so many people, they just don't know. And until you find yourself in a pitfall is when you have your wake up call. And I see the same with clutter. And if you're not taught the practical, tangible skills, it's easy to find yourself in these areas. But a lot of people white knuckle things, whether it's money or organizing or whatever. And so understanding the motivations of why you do the things that you do is so important. And that's why when you were promoting your new book, I was like, I have to have you on the show to talk about it, because it's exactly what we talk about here is about why we have clutter. So let's talk about the new book. Give us an overview of it, and then we can get into some specifics.
Yes. Well, probably about 3 years ago, I went on this kind of personal journey where I was discovering so much about myself. And that was through books. That was through like the Enneagram and different personality tests. I was in counseling, and no big event triggered this. It was just I kind of kept falling into this and realizing, wow, there are so many reasons why I do the things I do. And I think because of that and that self-awareness, I was a better wife, a better mom, a better team member, a better sister, a better daughter, all these roles I play in my life. I was just healthier emotionally overall. And then I thought, gosh, well, how does this affect my money? Can I take these same learnings and this kind of awakening of like, oh, wow, this is who I am, to my money? And I ended up going down this black hole of like all this content where I was like, I can't believe I've never really dug into this, because I tell people all the time that personal finance, it's 80% behavior. It's only 20% head knowledge. And so understanding what to do, much like clutter, right, and organizing, I know what to do. Okay, I get that. Now I actually have to do it. That's the bulk of the learning. You actually have to put it into practice and do it. And so that behavior change is so key. And I harp on behavior change a lot, but I never really ask the question, well, why do we have the behaviors we have? And if we can understand that why, then we can change other behaviors, because so many problems in life masquerade themselves as money problems. And they're really not money problems. They are life problems. But you have to go under this foundation of your life and your heart and figure out and ask those questions of why.
Absolutely. And I say the same thing. I always go, clutter is just a symptom. It's not the problem. The problem isn't the clutter. It's how do we get here in the first place?
Yeah, my debt, it's a problem, but why did I get there in the first place? Or I can't work with my spouse. Well, that's not a money problem. That's a marriage problem, right? Like, I mean, there's so many layers to this.
Well, again, and like debt, you can figure out, you could follow your dad's, you follow the baby steps, you could follow all these principles, you could get out of debt. But if you don't change the behavior, how quickly can you find yourself back in debt? How can that credit card bill be back up? So you can understand and pivot. And so that's where I think really the magic comes in. Let's talk about specifically your framework that you've done, because I think it's, again, it's so digestible, which is what I love about it. So you have a few different areas that you talk about. Why don't you just kind of highlight them and then we can walk through each?
Yes. Well, in the book, I dive into your money childhood, really going back to how you grew up with money, your money tendencies, your money fears, your money dreams. In the latter half of the book, I talk specifically on why do we spend the way we spend, why do we give the way we give, why do we save the way we save. Those are the big three money principles toward the end of the book. But again, diving under that foundation. But the childhood classroom is really where I start the book out. And it's such an important part, going back to say, okay, how was my household growing up? How does that affect me now when it comes to money and how I handle money today? And so what ended up happening is I realized, you really communicate about money in two ways, verbally and emotionally. And so as I was looking at these spectrums, I was like, man, this ends up being like this quadrant. And I was like, oh, Jesus gave me a graph like for my new book, and I love it so much. But it gave such a tangible way to say, yes, there are really four main money classrooms where those types of communication intersect.
I love it. And I actually did the quiz with my 17-year-old, or not the quiz. I was reading the book and I had the quadrant and I asked her, and it was actually eye-opening for me. Can you walk through what each of the quadrants are?
Yes.
So we could, let's give people let's not leave them in suspense.
Well, yeah. Oh, yeah. We'll dig right in. Okay. So the first quadrant is the anxious money classroom. And this is where communication about money verbally is closed, but emotionally it's stressed. So if you grew up in that first money classroom, you probably knew there was tension around money. If bills were coming up at the end of the month, you kind of felt it, but you never could pinpoint why because it was never talked about. The second money classroom is the unstable money classroom. And this is where it's verbally open, but emotionally stressed. So lots of conflict, lots of fighting. You probably heard your parents have the same fight over and over again. High tension, but again, it was talked about, so you knew it was there. And the classroom number 3 is the unaware money classroom, and this is where you're verbally closed, but emotionally calm. So in this classroom, you probably had your head in the sand, really didn't think about money much because everything kind of seemed okay, and it just wasn't a thing. A little bit of that, the oblivious side is that classroom 3. And then classroom number 4 is definitely the healthiest money classroom. And that is the secure money classroom. And this is where it's verbally open and emotionally calm. And you don't have to have a lot of money to be in this classroom. You could have $10, you could have 10 million. But the factor here is that money is controlled. There's a plan in place, so the stress level is down, and it's talked about. It's not a taboo subject. And so I do encourage the readers for their current nuclear family to really work to say, okay, how can we move this family into that classroom number 4? But going back to your specific childhood classroom for the reader, that's what's important, is to kind of pinpoint, because each of them, even the 4th one, have their weaknesses.
Yeah, absolutely. And I as I was reading it, of course, I was thinking back to my own childhood and how I now am as an adult and what my relationship was with money. And then as a mom, and I know you have littles, I have bigs. I have a 20-year-old and I have a 17-year-old. So I'm in a totally different season than you. But I asked my 20-year-old's at college, but I asked my 17-year-old which one she was in. And it was like, I think it was more the unaware. And I was like, I haven't done a good job. Like, she doesn't stress about it, but she's been fortunate. And I was like, I need to do a better job in really communicating these specific things, because it doesn't just happen. Just like I've walked through the process of organizing, the process of decluttering, just throughout their lives, because it's part of kind of what we do. I inadvertently just, they knew basic things. They know, like, you tithe, you save, but it wasn't really like talked about. And I was like, wow, I need to step up my game.
Right. No, and I think that's such a great call, because number one, there's a humility that we all have, right? Like, as parents, even with littles, I'm like, I know I'm not the perfect mom at all. And so what can I learn? What can I do better? And to kind of flag that and say, okay, this is good. But yes, that unaware money classroom, I find a lot of parents, they either grew up in this household and they're unaware, but there was tension behind the scenes, but they never knew it. So I talk to a lot of adults now, and they have realized as adults, wow, my parents are not in a good place financially. I thought everything was fine, but it's not at all. And then some people I find, no, we actually did really well, and it wasn't a stressful subject for us as parents. So we didn't really even think about it. It almost, it was almost on accident, right?
Right.
And that's kind of where you fall. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to move in, just because I know in the spirit of time, I want to make sure that we cover as much as we can. You also talk a lot about these 7 different, you talk about fear. Let's just talk about that. You talk about fear. And I talk a lot about fear in the work that I do. I think it plays a big role in so much of our lives. Let's just talk. Can you talk a little bit about
Yeah.
how you weave that in your book?
Yes. Well, fear is a huge motivation for why people handle money the way they do. And what was fascinating with this book, I got to talk to so many researchers and counselors and psychologists because, again, it's understanding more of who we are, not just the money principles. And so I talked to Dr. Chip Dodd, and I love what he said about fear. He said, fear is actually a gift. Fear is literally your body's response that you are in need of something. Now, when it moves to anxiety, that gets unhealthy. But when there's an initial fear that rises up, you have to name it and say, okay, this is what that fear is. Now, what things do I need to put in place in my life to help with that fear, to help that subside? And so seeing it, because I feel like sometimes fear, which again, on the grand scheme, going into anxiety, yeah, it's unhealthy, it's not good. But there are a lot of financial fears out there that people have. That's one of the top ones for women is the lack of security when it comes to money. So this question of, if something happens, am I going to be okay? That is like the number one fear for people, specifically women. Now in 2020, that was majority of Americans' fear, right? Everyone woke up and thought, okay, if something happens, are we going to be okay? And so that fear is good. Let that fear motivate you, because for some people, it wasn't good. 40% of Americans couldn't cover a $400 emergency in cash. 78% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. And then you put the layoffs on top of that, the furloughs on top of that. And that is going to shake people to their core. But that, in a sense, is a good thing, because I'm like, yes, wake up. You have to realize the way you've been handling money is not going to work in the long term. Or if something happens, put safeguards in place in your life, budget, get out of debt, have that emergency fund, make this a good motivator to say, I need to put things in place to help me. And so I walk through 6 of the money fears that I hear most common, write about that in the book. But again, seeing that fear, again, not anxiety, not unhealthy fear, but that initial fear of, okay, what is my body telling me? Okay, what things I need to put in place? It's just a good alarm system for yourself.
I love it. And it's true, because again, sometimes we need this wake up call, right? And so we
Yes.
use it as an opportunity to say, okay, I've been given this gift. It might not seem like a gift, but I've been given this gift. How can I pivot now? And what can I start to change? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, sorry, I was interrupted you. But and what's fascinating about fear too, I'm like, there's a tactical side of this, and then there's an emotional side. So you can put the tactical side in place. And Winston, my husband, and I, we've been doing this for 10 years. So we're on baby step 7 for all you Ramsey people out there, right? Like we've done this for a decade now. Like we have quote unquote made it on paper, if you will. But I even woke up during the pandemic. I mean, late March, early April, multiple times, or going to bed thinking and asking Winston, like, are we going to be okay? And on paper, we are fine. We don't have debt. We have an emergency fund, but there's an emotional fear there. So even for me there, I had to ask myself, okay, why am I still fearing this? I'm like, man, because the first time I probably gave money too much security in my life. Like I've probably given it a little too much, where like, if that was shaken, who I am as a person, is that going to be shaken? And so it just was a good emotional check for me. So there's tactical things you can put in place with your money fears, but there's also the emotional side you have to deal with as well.
I love that. And I'm so glad that you said that. And again, and from a vulnerability and transparency, like again, if you even felt rattled, right?
Yes,
then how does like the majority of America feel? So it's honest, and it's valid for all of us, but it's what do you do with that information, I think, is what's really important. So let's walk through the different fears that you talk about in the book, because I think that is going to be really helpful for people.
Yes, one of them, which was written before the pandemic. So I'm like, oh, this is so funny how things just happen in a book that you write a year before all of this. But it was that external forces are really going to not allow me to get ahead financially. That's because of what's happening, things out of my control. It's going to make a major impact, and I won't be able to get ahead. So that's everything from elections to a pandemic, to corporate America. I mean, it's all these things that we realize, well, we don't have control over. And again, I think we are shaken to our core in 2020, realizing, there are things we do not have control over, but what are the things that we can control? So instead of having the fear of the things that we can't control, we can't figure, what's going on in DC, like we don't have control over that. But what you have control on is what's going on in your home, in your life, with your family. So what are those things? Okay, how can we make these things healthier? Whether it's our money, again, our parenting, whatever it is. So find the things that you can control. So that's one of the fears. Another fear is that I'll end up like my parents. I talk to a lot of people, and they're like, man, my parents, can't retire, or my parents did X, Y, and Z, or my parents divorced because of money, whatever the situation was. They say, I just don't want to be like that. And so again, you say, okay, what tactical things do you need to put in place to make sure that doesn't happen? But also the emotional side, like what happened in your childhood that causes you to revolt so much that that's a fear in your life, to go back and say, okay, are there things that I need to work on there even in my heart?
Yes, absolutely. I love that one too, because I have a girlfriend that went through a divorce a few years
Mm.
ago, and so much of her marriage, which was, it was an unhealthy marriage for a lot of reasons, but she thought money was the security, that because she had the unhealthy, like, the bills were coming in, stressful one growing up.
Yes.
And so she saw what she thought was going to give her security, and it ended up being not the right person for her. And so, her, that part of her marriage was like kind of built on, false idols or whatnot.
Yeah,
And
for
it was
sure.
so interesting. So when I was reading like that whole part, I was like, oh my gosh, that's my girlfriend. Like she could so relate to that. I'm sure.
So that's the basics of a few of those fears. But also I talk about tendencies in the book. And I think this is really important because these tendencies, it's kind of more out of your personality. Some may be why you grew up the way you did, but figuring out this is why I handle money the way I do. And it's these 7 basic money tendencies, and neither one is right or wrong. There's kind of a spectrum, but there's not like a good side of the spectrum or a bad side of the spectrum. It just is what it is. But just saying it out loud and realizing it about yourself, you're going to realize, wow, this is why I spend the way I spend, why I save the way I save, why my spouse and I don't see eye to eye because they value this, I value that. I mean, you can kind of just, it gives you this vernacular to walk through life with yourself and the relationships in your life. So one of them, kind of high level, but it's spender versus saver. So
Yes.
are you more on the spender side naturally? That's kind of, and I would say, think back to like when you were a kid even, because as adults, we have so much baggage, throughout our life that may have changed this a little bit, but just say, okay, no, even as a kid, like, oh, I was just a natural spender or I was just a natural saver. So for me, I'm a natural spender. Love spending money, can do it all the time. I mean, I enjoy it. I've had to learn to save, so that moderation there and that spectrum is key. But I'm a spender. My husband is a saver, for sure, natural saver.
And I look at my kids. I have 2 girls, both raised in the same household. And my one is a total saver, and my one is definitely a spender. And
That's so
again,
funny.
and I think my husband and I are both spenders, but in different ways. I'm more big, like I want to spend to like invest in the house and do like big things. He's a spender, like I want a new pair of sneakers. Like I think
Yes.
so I don't want to say, because I'm like, when I first read it, I'm like, I'm more of a saver, and then I'm like, well, I'm not really. I don't know if that's accurate. I just have a different barometer of what I want to spend money on. I don't need the
Yes.
latest and greatest gadget, but my items are like bigger ticket items.
Yes. Well, that's another spectrum, is do you spend on experiences or things? And so I love this because for so long, I mean, I am an experience all the way. I'm like, I will spend money on a good dinner or a vacation or going with my kids to the zoo. Like, I am an experienced person. Where my husband, he is a thing. He's like, no, if I'm going to work hard and spend my money, it's going to be something I use over and over and over again. It's going to enhance my life and all that. Like, I look at our Christmas lists even every year, and I'm like, I just laugh, and I'm like, oh my gosh, because he wants like Alexa light bulbs, and he can be like, Alexa, turn the living room on, and I'm like, I want a spa gift card.
Yes.
It is just classic, so opposite.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, what are the other ones? Can you walk through
Yes.
them?
And then there's quality versus quantity. So when you do spend money, would you spend it on less expensive items, but to have a variety, or quality items? You'll have less, but it's like, no, I'm going to invest in these good pieces. And I'm quantity. I'm like, I will have 18 pairs of cheap earrings all day long versus like one nice pair. I just want the option and say, okay, and it's all organized. You'd be so proud of me. Like,
Oh, I'm sure.
I have this drawer, and I pull it out and I have little containers for every little earring. And I'm like, yes. And it's all right there. But I love the options where, again, my husband, he's quality. He's like, no, I need 2 nice pair of boots. That's all I need.
Well, and it's really interesting. I just want to hit the pause button real quick and talk about this one, because I think this is a really interesting thing, because, especially in our space, a lot of times people will talk about minimalism and you just need a few things. And again, when you look at whether your motivation and kind of what your internal drive is, that works for some people. Some people are like, I don't need a lot of things, but there are people that really enjoy they want to have the quantity. They want choices. For me, I suffer from decision fatigue. So I'd rather be
Yes,
like,
yes.
here's 3 pairs of shoes, pick one. But that is counterintuitive to some people. And it really makes it, if you want it to be sustainable, you have to make it work somewhat within your parameters. Yes, you're changing behavior, but you're not changing the core of the person. And
That's
I
right.
think that quality quantity in money is such a direct link with kind of the clutter organization, you
For
know?
sure, yes. And you have to be careful too, because when you go to all the extremes on all these spectrums, it can get unhealthy. So I know for me, quantity, I can justify purchases so quickly because I'm like, oh, it's just $12 on Amazon, or oh, it's not that big of a deal. It's pretty inexpensive, and it's fine. And I can start to cope with spending money, and I can just justify it in my head, oh, it's just this. And then you look up and you have a bunch of crap that you don't need, and you're like, oh gosh, what did I do? Why did I spend my money on all this? So you do have to watch, right? Like if it gets to the extreme, you have to watch. And I'd say same with quality too. People that are so driven on quality all the time. I have friends like this, and they will not buy something if it's not this label or this grain of whatever. And I'm like,
Yes.
all right, that's the extreme side, right? Extreme.
Totally.
So yeah, bring it back a little bit. So it's interesting looking at both of those. So another spectrum is when it's the motivation to win with money, and you say, okay, yes, I want to win. I want to do good with my money. Well, why? Is it more out of safety or status? So some people, it's like, yeah, I just want to feel like I'm safe. I'm good. The bases are covered. Everything's fine. And then other people are more status, which status sounds like a bad word. I don't mean it to be negative, but it's like, no, I will do it because I want to do other things with my life. I want to use this money to go and advance my life. And so you kind of lean on one side or the other, and figuring that out really is important. So I'm more of the status side. I'm like, listen, I will budget, but I'm going to budget so I can go on a nice vacation. Like I will budget or I will save money so that I can get a nice car. Or my sister, she's all safety. Like her and her husband, I joke all the time. For 3 years, they've talked about redoing their deck outside, and they have the money for it. And I'm like, Denise, redo the deck. And she's like, I know. And then a year later it'll pass. She's like, I'm thinking about redoing the deck. I'm like, redo the deck. And she's like, I know. The money in the bank just feels better than like the new debt. Like, I think we're fine. Like, yeah, she's more of the safety aspect.
Oh my gosh. Now, I don't want to get off onto a tangent topic, which it could be a whole other conversation, but have you looked at, because a lot of the work I do has to do with the Enneagram.
Oh, I love the
Have
Enneagram.
you looked, I know you do. And have you looked at I wonder, is there a connection between people's tendencies and their Enneagram type?
And their Enneagram number. You know, I've done a few Enneagram podcasts, and we dive into each of the tendencies and like kind of how they handle money the way they do. So I think that there is some overlap. It's not as black and white as I would personally love it as an Enneagram lover. I wish it was like, so.
I know.
But yes, I think you can definitely pull, okay, she's a 2. So these are her, she tends to lean more on these sides, or I'm a 3. So I tend to lead on others. Yeah.
Yeah,
for sure.
No, because I'm doing the same thing with clutter right now. I'm in the process of working on, I have a whole framework. I'm process of writing a book on it, but it's not as black and white, but it's more of like, if you're a 3, these are some strategies that you can use to, address each of these pitfalls. Because as you're talking, I'm like, oh my God, this is so like Enneagramish.
It is. Oh, it so is. What are you? What's your number?
I'm an 8, like your dad.
You're an 8. Oh, I love 8s. A lot of my girlfriends are 8s.
Really?
That's awesome. Yes.
Okay.
I love an 8.
Other female 8s. So.
Yes, I love that. That's so awesome. But yeah, I think that, your tendency, plays for sure into the Enneagram, which is one of the things I loved, where I was like, oh my gosh.
Yes.
But also just seeing these, and for me too, these tendencies, it's just that vernacular, which I feel like the Enneagram was a gift because it kind of gives you this language.
Totally.
And these tendencies, that's what I wanted to do too. When we do the budget and I'm like, oh yeah, no, I want to put restaurant category like really big. And Winston's like, babe, we'll just cook at home. No, I want the experience of going out on a date with you. So I even have a date night category in our budget because I'm like, I just need it there. I need it separate because I want to be able to enjoy it to the max to know, yes, this money is there. Where he's like, hey, the Amazon category, up that a little bit this month because I want to go, spend on that because he's so gadget oriented. But again, giving you that language to understand yourself, but also to empathize with others. And when you're in relationship with others, specifically marriage for sure, but also with your kids, relationship with your parents, with your friends, just understanding why people are and why they make the decisions they do with money. It just gives you a level of empathy.
I agree. And we're almost out of time. So I want to be like super respectful, and I want to just, I really am going to encourage everybody, not that you need the props, but I'm going to encourage all of our listeners to go out there. Your book just came out, so it's available everywhere. You can go to Amazon, you can go to Ramsey Solutions. It's a great resource. And I think to really, again, we talk about having a better understanding and grace with your spouse, with your kids, with your parents, whatever. I think this is a great tool to keep in your toolbox of understanding and just not get as frustrated. For me, it's like, oh, this is why. And again, like all tools, it's not an excuse for poor behavior, but it's a tool to say, here, we can use this and have some language to put around it and then move forward. So that was my little endorsement. I'll let you wrap up, Rachel, by sharing where's the best place for people to learn more about you, all of your resources, books, all the things.
Well, thank you. Yeah, you can go to rachelcruze.com, or again, the book, like you said, is sold anywhere books are sold. I also have a podcast, The Rachel Cruze Show, and a YouTube version of that as well. So yeah, you can check that out. And it's so fun. I love being able to talk about this subject and really diving into the hearts of people and affecting that behavior, because I'm like, oh, we can play whack-a-mole with our problems in our lives, right? You smack one down and the other one pops up somewhere else. And it's like, no, we can get to the heart of who we are, understand ourselves, and make better changes for our behaviors. We can win in our money and our life.
I love it. Okay, I have to, my listeners will kill me if I don't do this. It's our last thing. We always ask our guests 2 questions because our show is all about honesty and authenticity. So we always ask, in this particular season of your life, where do you feel the most organized and where do you feel like a little bit of a hot mess?
Oh, great question. The most organized, I would say I feel, I mean, you'd be so proud of me, but I'm being for real. I think in my home, we moved into a new home last year. And when I walk in, I was like, again, you would be so proud. I need to take you through my home because I have containers in almost all my drawers. I mean, I was like so hardcore when we moved in because I'm like, I'm a mess. I am. My closet's always a mess. My bathroom's a mess. My car's a mess. Like I'm a more messy person than I am like super organized. But when I have a specific drawer and a specific container for everything, it goes in there. Like I have become organized and it gives me peace. Oh, it gives me, when I walk in my closet, I'm like, oh, it's so peaceful because everything has its place. So I feel very on top of it there. I feel like a hot mess as a mom right now with 3 little kids.
I was going to say, you've got 3 littles during a pandemic. You get a pass.
No, it's so crazy. I know. And I'm trying to balance, the whole work mom thing. And I have a little one. My 3rd one was a boy and he just like took my heart over. I love him. I mean, I love my 2 girls too, but this little boy, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I love being with them. But it's a hot mess all the time, but I love it though. I kind of have embraced it. I'm okay with that.
Yes. And it's season, that situation, like that's just a season and then they get big. And then it's different. So
yeah, that's right.
Well, Rachel, it's truly been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom with this Organized Life community. If you're new to our show, please click the subscribe button. You can find us anywhere. And if you are on Facebook, hop on into our Facebook group, This Organized Life Podcast. You can post questions, ask questions, your money questions, clutter questions, and we will be there. I'm Lori Palau. Until next week, peace out.